Is it the end of the American empire? You know, what was the American empire, for that matter? From Trump's insane, I can't even call it an immigration policy, his brutal re-election policy, to the general insanity of Paul Ryan's press conference this morning, in which he was blaming the inability of Republicans to pass legislation when they control, in the House of Representatives, when they control the majority of the House of Representatives, blaming it on Democrats in the Senate. Right? Seriously. I'm not making this up. Paul Krugman writes in the New York Times today, "The Fall of the American Empire." It's the title. And the point that he makes is that, we may have 700, 900, whatever it is, military bases all over the world, and we may be, basically the reinvention of ancient Rome in terms of military empire. But the power that America historically had in the world was not a military power. And I realize, Chris Hedges and others have documented so well the abuse of American military power, particularly when it's done on behalf of corporate interests all around the world. But to this point, Krugman's main point is that the way that we principally influence the world, the way that we help bring about progressive democracies across Europe, in South America, in Asia, the way, supporting and supportive of those from Japan to South Korea to Taiwan, etc. The way that we did that was not by force of arms, it was by force of moral example. That we were great because we were good. Now, obviously, a country that is, to this day, killing its people with guns at an insane rate, and whose police officers are routinely killing unarmed young black men, and we'll get to that as we continue through the program today, can't be entirely good. But broadly speaking, we had been the country of ideals. We had been the country as John Kennedy said, we were the city on the hill. He was quoting John Winthrop, the preacher who was part of one of the early, in the 1680s, as I recall, one of the early settlements in North America. And then, of course, Ronald Reagan took Kennedy's quote, added the word shining to it, and made us the shining city on the hill. But, the bottom line is that, this was the source of our goodness. And now, from the economic to the political to the moral, we seem to be collapsing. And Donald Trump, in my opinion, is not the cause of these collapse. It's a symptom of the collapse. These broad principles that this country historically stood for, even when we acted them out poorly, right? I mean, World War II, we're fighting for democracy with a segregated army. But even at that, we no longer have a segregated army, right? It's like step by step. We've come a long way, and now, in my opinion, what Trump is the symptom of this regressive tact that we've taken, a regressive tact that has been pushed by a small group of right-wing billionaires who have largely seized control of our economy through their businesses and their business monopolies, number one. Control of our wealth. Half of all new wealth in the United States is going to the top 1%. And control of our politics. For example, in the economic realm, our businesses we're no longer starting businesses in this country. I've started 5 successful businesses in my life, 2 that were kind of and 1 that just crashed and burned terribly. Right? That, anybody who's a serial entrepreneur can tell you stories like that. People aren't doing that anymore. And I've employed hundreds of people over the years and created those jobs in companies that still to this day exist. And many that don't. But, they were part of the engine of economic growth in the United States. This Quartz.com reporting or QZ.com. The U.S., the headline, the U.S. startup company is disappearing, and that's bad for the economy. While companies that were less than 2 years old made up 13% of all companies in 1985. Now, 1985 was 2 years after Reagan suspended the enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which to this day has not been successfully enforced in any meaningful way against giant monopsonies. So at that point in time, 13% of all companies were less than 2 years old. They were startup companies. 13%. Now, as the result of these giant mergers that happened because Reagan suspended the Sherman Act, it's harder and harder to break into a new industry. And if you do, a big company in that industry, if you come up with a great new idea, they'll just co-opt your idea and squash you like a bug. And you try to sue them, good luck. They got lawyers out the wazoo. You'll never have enough money to sue these guys. So it's now 8%. From the 90s until the 2010, the number of people who worked in companies that were less than 2 years old used to be 9% of our workforce. In 2010, it was 5%. This is from a study from Brookings Institution, number one. Number two, I was talking about this small group of right-wing billionaires. I'm going to read you the last paragraph of this article by Glenn Thrush and Erica Green in today's New York Times first, and then I'll read you the opening paragraph. The last paragraph, buried at the very end. Administration officials said the blueprint for the plan was a 2017 list of reorganization recommendations produced by the conservative Heritage Foundation. The right-wing billionaires. The group's wish list includes the elimination of a handful of well-known federal programs, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Gee, that just protects consumers, right? Screw them. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Yeah, who needs public radio? After all, occasionally they tell the truth on there, And the Export-Import Bank. Okay, here's the lead paragraph now. President Trump plans to propose a reorganization of the federal government as early as Thursday, today, that includes a possible merger of the Education and Labor Departments coupled with a reshuffling of other domestic agencies to make them easier to cut. Today's New York Times. And even more broadly speaking, I mean, we used to stand for at least, hey, we believe that every country should engage in trade in a way that works to their benefit. And other countries can protect themselves from that by having laws and policies and tariffs and whatnot that protect them. Well, here's the story. This is from today's New York Times, Alan Rappaport and Nicholas Fandos. Actually, yesterday's New York Times. President Trump urged lawmakers on Wednesday not to scuttle his administration's efforts to help the Chinese telecom firm ZTE, warning Republicans that his reprieve for the company was part of a broader geopolitical negotiating strategy. Right. As we all know, that apparently that negotiating strategy had to do with the Trump Hotel in Indonesia getting $500 million, $500 million from the Chinese government, and another $500 million, another $500 million from a bank largely owned by the Chinese government, and his daughter getting 14 trademarks from the Chinese government. And all of a sudden, hey, ZTE, come on in. And keep in mind, it was Trump who first proposed banning ZTE, or at least the Trump administration through Wilbur Ross's Department of Commerce. So what does, one of the head Republicans in the Senate say about this? John Cornyn. Well, I'm pretty optimistic we'll be able to come up with something that preserves the president's leverage, because he's telling us, look, when I'm negotiating with Xi, this is more than just trade. This is more than just sanctions. This is about North Korea and other geopolitical issues. So we wanted to make sure we weren't stepping on his need to have credibility and to be able to use his military authority, his authority to negotiate as well as in these other spaces. So all Trump has to do is invoke national security, and the Republicans roll over.